This week we're coming back to the idea of monitoring and assessment. And actually, when we first hit this topic, it was early in the semester. We were looking at that chapter by Brown because we were thinking about diagnostic or placement types of tests that might be useful in understanding your students' needs. So now we're coming back to it and thinking about assessment, but more on the what have students learned kind of end. So going back over some of the types of assessment, earlier in the semester we talked about placement tests, trying to ascertain a student's overall level in order to best fit them to a class. There is also diagnostic tests in which you try to understand students' strengths and weaknesses in order to better address their needs in class, so maybe helping you choose topics if all of the students are struggling with a particular item. But then the chapter kind of diverges a little bit here and talks about one way of monitoring and assessing learning is simply through observation of learning. And that sounds pretty much like what you would expect. You know, when you're conducting an activity in class, how is it going? Do students seem to be learning? We'll talk a little bit more about it as we move forward. And then the chapter also talks about, differentiating a little bit between short-term achievement, so what have they learned kind of as the class is progressing, and then major markers of achievement, maybe at the end of the course, potentially with more than one test or achievement measure. And then the final one was, of course, a generalized proficiency. So we're actually going to focus on the middle, observation of learning, short-term achievement, and final achievement types of tests, because I think they'll be more useful when you think about program evaluation moving to the next week. So let's talk about observation of learning a little bit. The first, before you can really assess whether learning is happening, right, you have to start with the question, what is the goal of learning or of the activity that you're working on? And actually, as you're finishing up your curriculum design, you've already linked some of the learning goals with the activities that you're doing for that week. So hopefully you already have those in mind. And then you have to start thinking about, well, what can I see that might help me tell whether these goals are being met? So first of all, when you're giving out an activity to students, can they stay focused on the task? If not, right, obviously it's hard to learn when you're not paying attention. So that's a critical one. But then also in terms of being able to see whether students are able to accomplish what you're asking them to, do learners seem to have the skills necessary? So if you give them a communicative language task, are they constantly like looking up words? Some degree that's okay, but if they're having to look up everything and they're not actually able to communicate, you might not have hit the target with that particular task. Similarly, if and this kind of ties into the next one, if they're constantly asking for your support in communicating their ideas, they may not have the skills actually necessary to do the task, which means it might prevent them from learning whatever it is that you're trying to get out of that activity. In terms of teacher support, another key thing to look at here is simply like, are the directions clear enough that they're able to like jump into the task and get all of the learning out of it, or are they constantly kind of unclear about what they're trying to accomplish? So making sure that they're able to get through the task and that they're focused on it are critical for them to be able to learn anything out of it. And then as you watch students engage in these tasks, does it seem successful? For example, if it's that communicative task, are they going back and forth and communicating with each other in some kind of successful manner where they make progress towards the goals of the assignment? Similarly, if you give a student a writing task, are they actually writing things that may help them progress? The book talks about also short-term achievement, and you could think of this as somewhat between the previous item, right, which is observation of learning, and the next item, which will be these major achievement milestones. So for short-term achievement, you're looking at these little activities and assignments and maybe even like quizzes that are happening throughout the semester. But we're focused now on the product of the learning activities. Again, you have to start with the question, what should students be able to do? right? And this goes back to your goals for the activities, but also taking into account students' incoming abilities. Then we have to ask ourselves, how is success in those learning goals and objectives really, how can we measure it? If it's a writing task, for example, we probably couldn't measure it through a multiple choice test, or at least it'd be very tricky to measure writing ability through a multiple choice exam. So we have to think about what would be actual signals of success in a particular skill or in meeting an objective, and think of ways of measuring that objective. And then also, what level of performance are we seeking? If students are doing something for the first time, perhaps, getting it right about 50% of the time is a huge achievement. If they've been working on something all semester, maybe you're looking for actual mastery. So these are questions that we have to ask ourselves when we look at short-term achievement items. Now, one of the things that is useful about having assessment throughout the semester is that it can be useful for motivating students. And actually, one of the most interesting research studies I've done had to do with trying to help teachers in training get more prepared for dealing with second language acquisition students or second language learning students. And as part of it, I made them learn a language. And I tried not to assess them too much because that's really not a huge part of the course. But at the end of it, they said, oh, I wish we'd had more quizzes because I feel like we would have learned the language better if we knew we were being graded on it. So it can be motivating for students. We just have to find the right level. And one of the challenges you'll be facing if you're teaching in Texas is so many students are tested out. They're tested and tested and tested, and they're kind of exhausted by testing. So it might be particularly useful for you to think about ways of assessing learning that don't feel like assessments. The biggest question that we ask, though, when we're doing short-term achievement is simply, are students making progress? Often these short-term achievements, the focus is less on have they mastered this idea yet, because you might be looking at something every day, every week. But are they learning things? Have they acquired something new, or have they improved in their skill? Are they getting closer to what we're going to hope for at the end, right? At that final big achievement exam or assessment, do they seem on track to be developing those skills? So that leads us to the major achievement type of assessment. Usually when we have these types of things, you're thinking of once a semester, maybe twice a semester. Could even be like one test or exam or something in a year. That's their major marker of achievement. Now, achievement tests should be based on the content of the course. So remember, these are different from proficiency tests that are looking for generalized skills in order to, try to make some statement about kind of the level of a student. Instead, these should be specifically and blatantly tied to the content that is being covered in the course. Also, learners should actually know or have some idea of what's going to be in this assessment measure so that they can prepare for it. If you're asking for mastery, then tell them what they need to master in order to do well. Right? So often when I give exams, I tell students we're going to have 5 true false, 10 multiple choice, 3 essays, whatever is going to be on it. I often also try to link that to particular topics. So for my types of courses, which are going to be a little different from a lot of yours, I might say, 10 multiple choice on theories about language acquisition, 2 essays on factors that affect language acquisition, something like that. So they also know not only how I'm going to be addressing these different areas, but how that area then is tied to particular content. So they have some idea what to prepare for. Usually achievement tests are criterion reference. So we have some base level that we're looking for students to achieve in order to, for us to have considered it to be done well. And remember that this isn't norm reference, so it's not like you're trying to pick out how students are doing in comparison to others. We want them to master skills, and if all the students master the skills, in theory, in a criterion reference test, they should all be making high scores. Okay, a few other things about achievement tests. Achievement tests work from the idea that if something is to be learned, it should be learned well. We're looking for mastery. And this is something that I think we often kind of forget because we want to be sensitive to students' struggles, especially those that are maybe falling behind. And I think we can acknowledge that students may come to these issues or these skills at different speeds with also the understanding that ultimately the goal is for something to be mastered. If you're teaching a reading course, your ultimate goal, right, is that they will be able to read with ease and with, you know, high levels of comprehension. If you're teaching a speaking course, your ultimate goal, right, is for them to master the skills they need, which might include like strategic competence. It might include a lot of like the really easy fragments of conversation that we often use. So it's going to have a wide variety of skill, but we're looking for them to be able to go out and actually speak to people and to do so without challenge. And so that is mastery. Achievement tests also work from the idea that every learner is capable of learning. However, speeds may differ, and some students may need more help than others. And from achievement tests, we're hoping to give every student the chance to learn well and for them to succeed in our achievements as well, our achievement assessments as well. But one trap I don't want you to fall into, and this is for both, you know, for observational learning, short-term achievement, and the achievement, is that it doesn't have to just be exams. And as I mentioned, if you're doing like writing, it's probably hard to do it just with a multiple choice question. So you have to think about what would really test the skill. I've seen a lot of tests that were supposedly of speaking that had written multiple choice items, and you could maybe get kind of creative, but if you don't actually have students speaking for their speaking assessment, you probably haven't quite gotten onto the target that you're trying to measure. And not only does it not just have to be like the typical written exams, it doesn't have to be an exam. Imagine you have students do some kind of end of the semester project and they present it, and maybe that's the culmination of the things that they're supposed to be learning, and you grade it. That is an assessment as well. So keep in mind that there's a lot of flexibility here about what this could look like. All right, for any exam or assessment that you're thinking of creating, there are three really important ideas that you have to keep in mind. Every test should be reliable, valid, and practical. I'm not going to go too far into this. Hopefully you've gotten some testing background from other courses. I know if you're in the MA ESL program, you're probably taking testing right now. But I just want to hit on some of the major ideas. So for reliability, would that person that you are testing right here and now, would they score similarly if they took the test at another time? So let's say you had them take the same test basically tomorrow, or even maybe under slightly different conditions. Would they still get the same score? If they would get drastically different scores, you might have a reliability issue, especially if you have different versions of an assessment. You know, maybe the essay question on one test is kind of easy for people to tackle because it's like really logical and it progresses easily. And then the essay topic on the next test is kind of more challenging because it's vague or something like that. And then suddenly you have students getting very different scores, very different displays of their knowledge. So that has to do with reliability. The next idea is validity. This is that the test measures what it says it measures. And you can go kind of big picture here, like if it's a listening test, are students actually listening and representing their ability to listen? But you can also get down to kind of micro items. What are the particular skills and learning objectives, and does your test match up with those? And then finally, for practicality, you've got to think about whether the test is affordable. And this does not just mean how much do you pay for the test, because you could create your own test, right? But there's also cost and time for any test that you do. You know, teachers are going to have to proctor these exams, give these exams. They're also going to have to score these exams. How long does it take to score? You have to think of a reasonably quick system for teachers to be able to score, or they're going to get kind of frustrated. Okay. The final thing is that every test needs to provide useful data. Now, if you have ensured that your test is reliable and valid, you probably have something useful in that data. But how are those numbers going to be translated into something that teachers can work from? Are you going to be able to tell them particular skills that they need to work on next year to make sure that students better address some of the weaknesses that you saw in the test? If there's no breakdown of scores and teachers just get one massive score, is that enough for them to do something useful with? All right, so things to think about. Are teachers going to be able to do enough with the data? Are students going to be able to make sense of the data to know where they need to work on their different skills? All right, if you address all of these, you're on your way to being able to assess student learning throughout the course. And obviously you can combine this with other forms of testing. One way that I've done testing in the course is to use a diagnostic test at the beginning that sets out strengths and weaknesses. And then sometimes I have required that for students to pass a class, they have to show marked improvement in all of the weak areas. So I'm simply there looking for improvement as one marker of what they've been learning in the class. So a way of showing progress. So you can get somewhat creative with these, but you need to keep these ideas in your mind about what your options are and what you need to be looking out for. For example, you've always got to be looking out for reliability, you've always got to be looking out for validity, always got to be looking out for practicality. Okay, so that is the major concepts for this week.